Hi, I'm Cinda Galt, here to tell you about my new historical novel, A Small Compass, to be released April 1st by Grey Goose Press, Inc. I stumbled upon the idea for this story when I was researching my last historical novel, This God-Forsaken Place. I discovered a footnote written by a fur trader in 1807 in his journal. He was talking about an Orkney lad, someone from Scotland who had come to work as a labourer for the Hudson's Bay Company. He noted that the Orkney lad had just delivered a baby on the hearth of the Northwest Company outpost. This was too good to leave uninvestigated. By the time I tracked down who she was, I had two full-blown Canadian legends on my hands, two women who had decided they were not going to live the way they were expected to live in their times. One from across the Atlantic, the other from Maskinongé, Quebec. They each made momentous decisions that would change their lives. They wound up at Pembina, North Dakota, part of Rupert's Land, Canadian territory at the time, and had their babies a week apart, not 500 yards from each other. There's no historical record of whether these two ever met. I'm a writer, I can fix that. Since these are separate but interweaving stories, I have two protagonists, so I'm going to read you two short passages. The first one is about Isabel Gunn, when she still is very much entrenched in the ordinary life that she desperately wants to escape. 5 girls between 22 and 41, all at home and not one married, no hope of a life of their own. The only son, her brother George, was the one who could waltz off to Hudson Bay. On a night like this, Orkney girls pulled covers up to their necks to dream about ships foundering off the coast, their men pitched to thrash about in a furious sea. Then one of them might wash up motionless on a freshened beach by morning. He would open his eyes to the concerned face hovering over him, struck by love. It had happened once or twice, and much was made of it. But the truth was that should 100 soggy bachelors be cast up by the sea, they would have their pick of a long line of beauties before getting to a woman built like Isabel. She didn't mind how she looked. There was simply no point in pretending she'd be anyone's first or second or third choice, especially since all the young men were gone. She had a pleasant smile, as most people did, that was no more memorable than the rest of her ordinary face. She had no big eyes capable of tempting a man into their depths. Her cheeks were ruddy, not rosy. Her neck was stout, not elegant. Able to lift what her father could not, she was the one sought out when others could not manage what needed to be chopped or shoveled or carried. When one did a man's work, there was no need for a pretty face. But she did mind when her brother George would say, "Ah, Isabel, women aren't built for adventuring. Your lot is here minding the sheep. It's men who are meant to paddle pelts down the rivers of Rupert's Land." He said it to goad her, she knew, and she was always willing to give him the expected retort. "You've become a personal messenger for the Almighty now, have you, George? Did you meet him over there in Hudson Bay?" She was careful never to reveal how close his spears came to the soft spot in her armor. He was right that God had tilted the table. With no young men left here, she would never have a family of her own. Nor could she go down to town to be a cabinet maker, butcher, innkeeper, fisherman, or shipbuilder. She couldn't go farther afield to be a coal miner, soldier, or laborer in Hudson Bay. "What's wrong with minding the sheep, Isabel?" her sisters would say, upholders of the natural order and traders. She wasn't put off farming by the cold winds or long damp hours of standing, the aching back from hauling kelp, or the fetid smells of manure. None of that bothered her, and there was nothing particularly wrong with kneeling so that others might climb on her shoulders, nor sacrificing her own experience of the world to settle for stories from others, nor minding someone else's hearth with no hope of having her own. Nothing was wrong with it, as long as she was content to have nothing for herself. The doors of this prison could only stay closed if locked from the inside, and that was why George's claim pained her. The women around her didn't go adventuring because they didn't seem to want to go. What was wrong with her then? This next passage is about French-Canadian Marie-Anne Gabry on the day that is completely different. This sets a new course for her that she never could have imagined. It was as if he had stepped into the schoolroom directly from his canoe, bringing with him the smell of wood smoke and the promise of a night sky loaded with stars. His deerskin jacket, fringed with horsehair, was draped over broad shoulders and topped by a wool cape. He wore an otter cap pushed to one side of his head. Hair down to his shoulders, he did not in the least resemble a scrubbed farm boy. He bowed, oddly gentlemanly, and paused before speaking. His voice was as smooth as a deeply running river. As he spoke, he walked slowly down the aisle between the benches, with footsteps silent as a fox. He told of a fellow engagé near Pembina who had been carried off by a bear, her 2 cubs trailing behind. Roused by the man's terrified screams, his companions had raced from camp to give chase, prodding the bear with branches, afraid to shoot lest they accidentally kill their friend. The man shrieked for them to shoot, that he would rather be shot than eaten alive. When they finally convinced the bear to relinquish her prey, their friend's face had been ripped to the point that his nose and eyes were gone. Still alive, he eventually healed and to this day was employed at jobs around the post. To be fair, Jean-Baptiste said, in case any of you think bears are monsters, capable of only destruction and evil, there is a man I know well, Alexander Henry the Younger, master of the Northwest Company outpost at Pembina, who raised up a bear from a cub. Today, when you enter the front gates of the palisade, the first friendly face you see is this bear shuffling toward you for an enthusiastic embrace. I have seen it with my own eyes, smelled him with my own nose, and embraced that bear myself, but unfortunately he smelled a lot like a bear. The other grave danger lurking in the wilderness came from Indian attacks. Marie-Anne knew about them, not from her safe Quebec village hugging the St. Lawrence River, but from Père Vinay's books. Jean-Baptiste identified the warriors, the Dakota Sioux, as the source of the trouble on the plains. They roam looking for anyone, white, Ojibwe, Assiniboine, Cree, who might be friendly to Frenchmen. To the Sioux, Indians who cooperate with the French are bad omen, responsible for chasing the beaver out as far as the prairie, where they have never been before and do not belong. Beavers have ventured beyond where they used to go, but the Frenchmen are not to blame. Maybe no one understood that the beaver are also adventurers. When roving parties of Sioux happen upon small bands in helpless circumstances, examples are made of their bodies. I will refrain from describing their desecrations in detail as a gesture of respect for your stomachs and their souls. When he bowed to Père Vinay, Marie-Anne knew the priest was thinking about the same stories of the Jesuits as she was. Gerald Thiora from a neighboring farm asked why Jean-Baptiste would choose to live in such dangerous circumstances. You are right, there is danger, and there is a higher chance to starve as a hunter than as a farmer. The attraction of the life out there is that I am a free man. My combat involves bison, deer, beaver, marten, and other animals for meat and pelts. When I succeed, I eat. When I fail, I am hungry. I am responsible for my own destiny. Why have you come back? Someone shushed the questioner for being too forthright. He laughed. I have come in search of barley and buckwheat so I can eat pancakes. Of course, bison is the best meat in the world, but I have been dreaming about pancakes and our maple syrup for 7 years. Some of the girls called out that they would make him pancakes, and the crowd laughed. Marie-Anne smiled but did not call out, although he was standing only a few feet away. He was close enough for her to see details of the matasse strapped around each of his shins as protection from the snow, and his moccasins with blue and yellow porcupine quills affixed with red beads. She wondered who might have sewn those adornments. Abruptly, Jean-Baptiste swung around and walked in her direction. Then he seemed to see her for the first time, as though he knew her and was surprised to see her here. She assumed that he remembered something or was perhaps formulating his next story, but as time stretched uncomfortably, it became apparent he had been struck dumb. He stared at her in increasingly uncomfortable silence. The room watched, holding its breath, somewhat confused by his reaction. Finally, he bent down on one knee in front of her. "What is your name?" he whispered. No one squirmed, laughed, or prodded him to continue the story. Entranced, they all watched. Now, of course, I want to jump in at this point and give you context and details and tell you what's going to happen and all kinds of things, but I need to let the story do that for itself. But I would like to invite you to my website, cindagalt.com, where you can find discussion questions for book clubs and the opportunity to leave questions and comments that will hopefully spark a conversation. I look forward to meeting you.